One beautiful sunny day, in one of the courtyards of the city sat a bird that was happy about the new day. It was very happy to be in its new nest. At one moment, the husband of the bird arrives, who is very happy with his lady that he has brought a new material for their nest. Satisfied, Madam Bird is moseying to her man. She was very pleased to feel care from her man. But in one moment, the beautiful sweet moment of the birds was interrupted by a sharp noise in one of the nearby houses. The neighboring house was just very much turned upside down. The noise was all over the street. It was clear that something wrong was going on in the house. In fact, in the house there was a very funny situation. Jerry Bear tried to run as fast as possible. His little legs were running one after the other, and frightened Jerry ran wherever his eyes led him. Cat Tom really wanted to catch up with his opponent, so he took out everything he had at hand. First he took out a vase, and then he took out a heavier object such as a sculpture. The cat was very determined to grab Jerry. He smiled slyly and almost caught up. At one point the cat decides to catch the mouse. A sharp movement, he can catch only his palms, as Jerry slips out of his hands cleverly. Jerry Bear was very active and agile. Coming downstairs, he instantly looks for where to run. Finding the kitchen door, Jerry flies into the kitchen. Meanwhile, downstairs, Cat loses his opponent. Guessing that most likely Mishka is in the kitchen, Tom smiles and sharply satisfied goes into the kitchen. Jerry Bear notices that Tom has already entered the kitchen. At first he was very frightened, but then decides to run quickly. Under Jerry's feet falls soap, which was on the table, and he just runs in place. Very frightened and on adrenaline, Jerry accelerates very strongly. Thus, at one moment, the soap flies out from under his paws. Soap flies right under the paws of Tom the cat. Not noticing it, the cat heads closer for his prey, as suddenly steps on the very oil and slides on it, losing control and balance in general. Losing control, Cody crashes right into the wall. Then the ironing board from the wall falls directly on the head of the poor cat. Very angry, Tom tries to come to his senses after the situation that happened to him. As soon as he succeeded, he repeatedly on his head flies an addition iron. The iron was very heavy, so it hit Kodak's head. Jerry saw it, so he was very scared of the situation and the consequences for himself. Tom abruptly starts to chase again. The mouse was very much afraid. Turning around, he saw behind him a hungry huge cat. So he tried to run away as fast as possible right through the sink full of dishes. The mouse ran as fast as he could, then he jumps on the stove switches and activates the hot stove. Tom at speed catching up with the mouse abruptly hits the red-hot hot stove. Then there was a blender, through which Jerry also jumped, thereby activating the start button. The cat speeds into the blender and starts spinning around in it, as if on a merry-go-round. After a high-speed merry-go-round, poor cat falls into the juicer, which abruptly shoots a jet of fresh drink all over the kitchen. Very frightened, Jerry tried to run away, but the table ended. In the reflection of the toaster, he saw how the cat is very close, all smeared and with eggs in the place of the eyes. The scary cat stood in front of the mouse. Wiping his face and shaking it off, the cat smiled a wicked smile, as he realized that his opponent was already cornered and had nowhere to go. Jerry tried to pull himself together and instantly come up with an escape plan. At one point the cat attacks. He was so clumsy that he jumped up and hit the toaster with his head, and Jerry had a chance to escape. The cat stood there, unable to figure out how to get the toaster off his head. Next still managed to remove the toaster from his head, but Cat's face was already itself like heavily toasted burnt morning toast. The little mouse, meanwhile, does not hesitate. He pulls the rope of the blinds and hanging on it like a Tarzan flies to a safer place in the kitchen. The cat seems to be up to something. An evil grin spreads across his face, and he activates the ceiling fan to maximum, which sharply twists the little mouse on the rope and he is about to fly away. This situation was very funny to Tom. The cat just stood and laughed with his opponent. At one point the mouse flies off with a powerful blow right into the wall above the refrigerator. Jerry notices that the cat is already trying to sneak up on him, and decides to do something about it, to move the jar that was on the refrigerator so that it falls on the floor, or directly on the cat. In a moment, the jar was already on the very edge, and in a second it was flying down right on Tom's head. With a sharp and strong blow it nails him to the floor, and then the dishwasher closes with the cat inside. Jerry was very pleased with how cleverly he did it. Then he jumps on the activation button and starts the dishwasher. Then the mouse just decides to leave the kitchen as soon as possible. In a few minutes, the kitchen just started to fall apart. The water jet destroyed absolutely everything. All the pipes were destroyed. A huge stream of water sent the cat into the sky, and everything around was maximally destroyed. Already in the sky, the cat gets a shell on his head. After he slowly tries to come to his senses, he sees an airplane, which at great speed is flying directly at him. The cat falls directly into the turbine of the aircraft and abruptly remains without hair, without a single hair, after which the scary bald cat begins to fall to the ground at a tremendous speed. Meanwhile, the mouse was enjoying the peace and quiet. He was lying on the statue that stood on the piano and wanted to eat his cookies, as suddenly a huge shell with a cat flies right on his head. After everything fell on his head, the mouse tried to come to his senses. As soon as he succeeded and tried to leave the sink, the cat in front of him grabbed him sharply. It would seem that the mouse has no way out, but he sharply grabs the faucet and a strong jet of water directed at the face of the cat. After that he slips out of the cat's clutches and runs all over the room, wherever his eyes lead him. At one point Tom noticed fruit on the table, which was just standing in the plate, but the cat came up with a way to stop the mouse. The cat abruptly grabs one of the fruits and starts throwing it directly at his opponent. Jerry, meanwhile, has a knack for dodging anything that comes his way. The cat notices that Jerry dodged the fruit very easily. Then he decides to move on to heavier weapons, and grabs the spears that were hanging on the wall in the living room, and attacks poor Mouse. Then the cat notices a huge globe that stood a step away from him. Not thinking long, he decides to sharply push the huge globe in the direction of Mouse. Jerry, when he saw a huge globe flying at him, was very frightened, but managed to escape from the place. A huge globe ball falls right into a burning fireplace with wood. As it turned out, Cat is very clever. Seeing the rack with wine, Tom jumps on each torture, and Court tries to knock down his opponent, but Mouse easily dodges, jumping on the chandelier. The cat did not know how to stop this agile mouse, but he saw an iron statue of a knight, and a very interesting weapon in the hand of the statue. It was a large mace. The cat began to chase his opponent with sharp and strong blows, trying to strike a devastating blow. But the agility and speed of the little mouse cannot be taken away. Cat notices a statue that has arrows on the side, and quickly thinks of a way to use the weapon. Taking the arrows, Cat goes to the musical harp and decides to use it instead of a bow. Sharp arrows flew one after another directly at Mouse, but agility helps Jerry dodge, and the arrows just shatter the window. Then Jerry still manages to get out of the building, and the mouse is on the street, but behind her also broke out the cat. At one point, he jumps on the mouse and gets his head right into the iron bucket, which stood in the yard. The cat does not understand what happened and what he has on his head. Rising with a bucket on his head, he starts to run. On his way, he does not notice the hammock, which was hanging in the yard, and at speed runs right into it. The hammock was pulled back like a slingshot, and Tom was thrown back by a strong blow into a tree. The cat flew through the tree and was flattened against the yard fence. At this point, the neighbor's bulldog dog was about to have a delicious lunch. The dog set himself a delicious lunch and made an incredible smoky bone. But then, the dog forgot something in his box and decided he needed to get back to it. Not thinking long, the mouse decides to steal the bone and set up the cat. She quickly grabs the bone, opens the cat's mouth, and carries the bone right into Tom's stomach. Jerry tried really hard and shoved the bone in as deep as possible that it was sticking out right on the cat's tail. In the meantime, the dog had already found the incredibly tasty sauce for which he was returning to the booth, but when he came to the plate, he found that his bone was missing, and he could not understand what had happened. The dog was very angry, because he began to realize that his lunch had just been stolen by someone and started looking around. He noticed the cat trying to come to his senses, and then he saw his bone sticking out right on the cat's tail. The dog was very angry that the cat had stolen his bone, and came closer with anger. The dog was so angry that he attacked the poor cat. He began to coward him, throwing him, and doing everything to get his bone back in his own paws. The evil dog tried to squeeze absolutely everything he could out of the cat, and in the end, he succeeded, and the cat was left flat, as if rolled in asphalt. The poor cat tried to crawl to the shed in the yard, where he found a bicycle pump, and began pumping his body with air, in order to recover and get back to normal. As soon as the cat recovered, he ran sharply into the barn, and flew out of it with a bullet, but only on a huge lawnmower and at high speed headed for the mouse. All over the yard, cat on a lawnmower flew after the poor frightened mouse. Then he broke the lawn and lost control, then found himself already behind the territory of his yard, and behind the wheel was Jerry. At that moment, a little calmed down, the dog decided to eat his dinner, because the smelly bone only aroused even more appetite. But the nearby tree, which was broken by the cat, could not withstand the load, and at one moment it simply collapsed right in front of the dog's lunch. On the streets of the city ran a huge lawnmower, which was controlled by a little mouse, and behind him on a rope, seeing nothing, flew poor cat Tom. The speed gained faster and faster. At this moment on the road on a skateboard was riding one of the local boys. His parents just yesterday gave him a skateboard, and the guy was enjoying his new gift. Meanwhile, in one sudden moment, a huge lawnmower with cat and mouse hits the guy at high speed, and he ends up without his skateboard on the floor. Now on the skateboard was a frightened kitty Tom. He looked under his feet, and could not believe that now, at high speed, he was riding a skateboard. But Jerry had a lot of fun. He was running on the steering wheel trying to control the lawnmower, but ahead was an intersection with a traffic light and a lot of cars. It seemed to be impossible to avoid an accident, but by a miracle the cat and the mouse on a lawnmower and at breakneck speed fly through a dangerous intersection. At this point, 2 local Central Park gardeners had just finished beautifying the Central Park bushes. Suddenly, Jerry on a huge lawnmower rushes right into the park, destroying everything in his path. The gardeners are very angry at these guests, but more so at the fact that all their hard work is being destroyed. Jerry keeps going at a great speed, followed by the cat on a skateboard. Mouse couldn't control such a huge lawnmower at all, so at one point, they knocked down the center statue of the park in the form of a huge space rocket. The park gardeners, when they saw it, they were shocked. The huge statue of a space rocket was hanging on by a thread. One more moment, and it would fall right on them. They froze and watched. A moment later, the large statue collapsed right on top of the 2 gardeners and smothered them with its great weight. The cat and the mouse at that moment crashed into the backyard and the warehouse of some building nearby, and then the chase began. Tom tried to finally catch up with his opponent. On his way, the mouse nuked the rope, by which he was able to climb to the top. The cat also decided to climb after him, but Jerry found a heavy big sack on top, and decides to drop it right on the cat. Instantly a large sack flies straight at Cat's head and knocks him off the rope. Cat falls to the floor and tries to understand what happened. Anger overwhelmed him. Tom quickly comes to his senses and found an iron ladder that will help him get to the top of the mouse. When he has already climbed to the top, they are separated only by a rope stretched between them. After gathering his thoughts and fear, Tom decides to walk on the rope like a gypsy to catch Jerry. He was very scared because he was afraid of heights, but his goal was stronger than fear. The mouse decides to act and starts to shake the rope. The poor cat tries to catch his balance on the rope, but it moves a lot because the mouse is yanking it. All events took place behind the screen of a huge hall, and at this moment in the hall there was a meeting of space and aliens. Great cosmonauts prepared their story about unearthly creatures and went out to tell it to the audience in the hall. Jerry is tired of pulling the rope and decides to untie it quickly. Tom was just shocked. At one point, he realized that the rope is not fixed and frightened, waiting for the fall. After that cat flew down, hanging on the rope, he knocks down a man with green paint, and he himself is covered in green paint. When the rope threw him aside, Jerry, not thinking long, he decides to grab the mouse at this opportunity, and finally he succeeds. He already has him in his clutches. Then they both flew backwards on a rope, pulling the screen off the stage right during the seating. When they stood up, their bodies were covered in green paint, and everyone in the building was terrified. The cosmonauts looked carefully at the large green monster with two pairs of eyes, large and small on top. They were very much frightened. At that moment, panic started in the hall. Everyone started screaming and running wherever they could because they took the cat and the mouse as space aliens. The two main space aliens started screaming like little girls. Then one of the cosmonauts decided to overcome his fear and began to greet the alien beings and gestured to show that they had arrived on Earth. One of the scientists also stayed behind. He was an old grandfather who had nothing to lose, but he was very interested in watching the aliens. After the scientist's grandfather stroked the aliens, the paint was washed off, and all around found that it is just a regular cat, and on his head is a small mouse. For a moment everyone froze, and then there was a command to grab them, and sharply all attacked the poor cat and mouse. There was a strong commotion. This situation did not frighten our heroes, and they calmly easy-gate out of the center of the battle, shaking themselves from excess dust. After the battle was over and everyone was tired, the cosmonauts realized that they were fighting only among themselves, and cat and mouse are standing and watching. Jerry decides to run away from this place and finds a vent in the wall and quickly slips between the bars. The cat also decides to run to this place, but because the cat is not small, he just at speed crashes into the bars. One of the cosmonauts decides to catch up with the naughty cat and at high speed crashes into the place, right into Tom. Cosmonaut flies to the floor, and instead of a head, now he has Tom's head. They both try to come to their senses. Cosmonfad does not understand what is happening and where his head is, because he feels only the body. He starts waving his hands and looking for his head, raising his hands higher. The cat decides to bite his hand hard. After a very painful bite, Cosmonfad gets very angry and starts pulling the cat's head away from his body, and he finally succeeds. The poor frightened cat is already right in his hand. Gathering all his anger, the cosmonaut decides to throw this bad cat out of the building as hard as possible, and with a strong kick in the ass, he throws Tom, who flies right into the street. Jerry was already inside the building at this point, and was watching the very interesting actions of the scientist. At that moment, the scientist was showing his space warriors a new potion that would easily prepare a meal in just a few moments, and then he pipetted a drop of the potion onto the powder he had scattered on the table. Before the eyes of the space warrior appeared delicious pizza. The guy was already starving and immediately began to enjoy the taste of this wonderful quick lunch. Watching all this happening, Mouse was also very hungry. He also wanted to try a tasty and quick meal. Meanwhile, the Space Warrior was eating the rest of the pizza. As soon as everyone had gone about their business, Jerry promptly headed to the table and decided to try to make himself a quick and tasty meal. Mouse tore off the bag and scattered the powder on the table, then took the pipette and dripped the magic space potion. In an instant, a freshly baked chicken appeared out of the powder, which was bigger than the mouse by a factor of 10. Jerry decides that this is not enough for him, and he wants to try another burger. Taking the dropper from the bottle, the mouse spills the contents of the potion on the table, thus wetting a whole packet of burger powder. A few seconds later, there was a big explosion, a bunch of burgers flying all over the room. One of the burgers, which flew at high speed, hit the cooler with that secret space potion. The bottle flew to the floor and broke. The contents began to spill all over the floor. The mouse was shocked. He didn't know what to do, because the current of the potion was already coming right up to the other boxes in the warehouse and was about to wet them. At one point, the boxes got wet and millions of dishes began to appear. The warehouse began to grow every second in size and inflate like a balloon. Mountains of food like waves were piled up in every room. Workers swam over the food by boat to get anywhere. The main Space Warrior wanted to go into the hangar, but with difficulty to open the doors because the food pressed her. But after a few minutes, he still managed to open the doors. The food was absolutely everywhere, in his pants, in his mouth, in his socks. Jerry the mouse also appeared out of nowhere. He crawled out of the mountains of food. One of the workers noticed him and shouted loudly and pointed his finger at what he saw was a mouse. All the staff began to chase the poor mouse. He tried to run away wherever his eyes led him. A scientist professor has devised a whole plan to catch the very cat that's chasing this mouse. Then a team of workers set out to catch that very tom cat. They took with them a fishing rod with a fish attached to it in order to lure the cat. When they came out of the building, they noticed Tom sitting on the doorstep. They threw him a fishing rod and Tom fell for it. Not the first time. With a sudden movement, Tom attacks the fish and grabs it with his teeth. When he fell for their bait, the workers started pulling him up by the comma, and generally they caught Tom in a net. Next, the kitty Tom was already in the building together with a scientist and his colleague. They scrutinized the kitty and wanted to send him into space. When this conversation took place, Jerry stood under the door and tried to overhear what the scientists were saying. When Jerry heard this information, he was very frightened. The scientist began to explain to Tom what he lives for. He told him that the cosmos is a very interesting thing that will give him knowledge, greatness, and glory. Cat Tom decides to agree to the scientist's terms after all. He then sets out to catch the very same mouse, because he's had it. Jerry the mouse was already feeling free and was just walking down the hallway and enjoying his cheese. And then, by chance, he saw Tom and immediately started running in the other direction. A little run further, the mouse runs into a very interesting room. It was a test capsule of cosmonauts. Cat Tom also decides to pursue him. He already felt him in his hands, and then just headed with him to the capsule for astronauts. Being already inside, he looked around looking for the same mouse. But at one point the mouse runs out of the capsule and locks the cat in it. Then he turns the key to make sure he doesn't run out anywhere. Poor Tom finds himself locked up. First, he tried to open the door, and then he realized he was locked in there and just watched through the window. But Jerry the mouse decided to teach the kitty a lesson and then headed for the control unit of the test pod. Next, Jerry the mouse would simply add power to the capsule in question and watch what happens to the kitty in it. With each power level, this capsule gained momentum. Tom was already fully pressed into his seat. But Jerry didn't stop. He kept spinning the levels more and more. The mouse wanted the maximum. The capsule gained a very wild speed. Kotick was already just pressed into the seat. At wild and frantic speeds, the capsule began to crunch and eventually break off with each cable. Soon, at such a great speed, the capsule was spun, thrown in all directions, hit all the walls, and then stopped on the floor, and the entrance flew off. A few minutes later, an exhausted tomcat floated out of the machine like a flapjack. He looked like a puddle after a fall rain. Jerry Mouse, when he saw Tom climbing out of the capsule, very abruptly started laughing loudly and pointing his finger at him, saying he was a loser. The cat was trying to recover after an incredibly strong and difficult ordeal, and then after a few minutes he had already decided to set off again in pursuit of the mouse. Jerry the Mouse ran to the very hangar where the latest hand-guided technological rocket stood. The mouse climbs on one of the rockets and starts to activate it. After a few seconds, the powerful engine lights up and the mouse takes off. Kitty Tom decided to keep up as well and jumped on one of the near rockets. Then he activated it as well and went on his way. At this point, a wild high-speed race through the sky on rockets from the cat behind the Mouseketeer began. In a few moments Tom was already catching up with his opponent, but still the mouse managed to slip away. Then the cat managed to get closer. When the mouse discovered this, he spun the rocket sharply, thus letting the cat lose control. Poor Tom tried to climb up on that rocket. He was thrown every which way, but he stayed on it. Next, the cat had another chance to catch up with the mouse. He was already very close and tried to grab him, but at one point they both ran out of fuel. At one point, they both lost control and flew down to the ground. During the flight, they were already crying, hugging, and just praying.